They said my 30-foot fishing boat was an eyesore that violated their precious community guidelines. What they didn't know? I owned the entire 47-acre lake their million-dollar homes were built around. Picture this. I'm Garrett Stone, 52, retired marine engineer, just trying to enjoy my morning coffee when this woman storms down my dock like she owns the place. The sharp crack of her designer heels on weathered wood, the bitter smell of her expensive perfume mixing with lake air. She slaps a certified letter in my face 72 hours to remove my boat or pay $500 daily fines. "This is our community now," she sneered, waving toward those million-dollar McMansions. "Your little hobby needs to go." The pure audacity made my coffee taste like poison. But then I remembered something buried in my grandfather's old deeds, something that would make her eat every single arrogant word. What would you do if your HOA tried to control property they didn't even own? Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Revenge is a dish best served with proper paperwork. Let me paint you the full picture. 3 years ago, I lost my wife Sarah to cancer, the kind of fight that empties your savings and breaks your soul. This 30-foot Catalina, Sarah's dream, was supposed to be our retirement boat. Instead, it became my floating therapy session, the only place I could process losing the love of my life without falling apart completely. The lake? Crystal Lake, 47 acres of pristine water surrounded by ancient oaks and the occasional deer coming down for a drink. I inherited this little slice of heaven from my grandfather back in 1987, a modest cabin on 2 acres that gradually expanded as I bought adjacent lots. After selling my marine consulting business for a comfortable 7 figures, I could afford to live simply but well. Then came Willowbrook Estates. Picture this. 24 McMansions sprouting around the lake like expensive mushrooms after rain. Average price tag? $1.2 million. Average owner? Tech executives and wealthy retirees who moved here for the pristine waterfront lifestyle, but somehow forgot someone was already living it. Enter our villain, Veronica Hartwell, 58, former corporate lawyer with the warmth of a tax audit. She moved here from California, paid $1.4 million for her lakefront palace, and immediately appointed herself HOA president. Always immaculate, imagine a real estate brochure came to life, wearing designer suits and driving a white Tesla that never has a speck of dirt. Her husband Richard? Commercial real estate mogul who treats every conversation like a hostile takeover. Together, they're the kind of couple who probably schedules their arguments in Outlook. The morning of the confrontation, I'm sitting on my dock watching the sunrise paint the water gold, steam rising from my coffee mug. The gentle lapping of waves against boat hulls, the sweet smell of honeysuckle from Sarah's old garden piece, you know. Then I hear those heels clicking down my dock like a metronome set to Entitled. "Mr. Stone, Veronica Hartwell, HOA president." She didn't extend a hand, just stood there radiating authority like a perfumed police officer. "We need to discuss your watercraft situation." "Good morning to you too," I said, not getting up. "What situation?" She whipped out a burgundy binder thick as a phone book. "Community watercraft standards clearly state no vessels over 25 feet. Your boat violates established guidelines." I almost laughed. "Ma'am, I've had this boat here since before your neighborhood existed." "Times change, Mr. Stone." That smile could freeze vodka. "We have standards now, property values to protect." The thick weight of that binder when she dropped it on my dock table like she was delivering commandments from Mount Homeowner. Page after page of rules about boat colors, dock materials, even approved fishing hours. "This is America, lady. I can park my boat on my own property." "Actually," she said, adjusting her designer sunglasses, "the community waterway usage agreement supersedes individual property claims. We've consulted attorneys." 48 hours later, that certified letter arrived with the legal letterhead and everything. Morrison and Associates, the kind of law firm that charges $500 just to answer the phone. The demand was crystal clear. Remove the boat within 72 hours or face escalating fines starting at $500 daily, climbing to $1,000 after 30 days. But here's the kicker. I discovered they'd already filed preliminary lien paperwork at the courthouse. These people weren't playing games, they were playing for keeps. Buck Martinez down at the marina pulled me aside that afternoon, his weathered face serious as a heart attack. "Garrett, they've been asking questions. About your registration, insurance, even environmental impact studies. This ain't just about boat length, brother." The metallic taste of anger filled my mouth as I realized the scope of their ambition. They weren't just trying to move my boat, they were trying to move me. What they didn't know, Granddad didn't just leave me property, he left me something much more valuable. The kind of patience that comes from knowing you're holding all the cards, even when everyone else thinks they're running the game. Day 3, and Veronica wasn't messing around. I'm barely through my first cup of coffee when I hear the crunch of gravel in my driveway. Process server, 6 a.m. sharp, with legal papers thick enough to use as a doorstop. Morrison and Associates had escalated to DEFCON 1. The cease and desist letter read like a declaration of war. My boat was now officially a navigational hazard, an environmental threat. They demanded a $15,000 environmental impact study at my expense, naturally plus immediate removal pending results. Here's where my engineering background kicked in. Years of reading contracts taught me something most people don't know. HOA bylaws can't actually supersede existing property rights without proper legal process. They were basically trying to bluff me with fancy letterhead, hoping I'd fold like a cheap suit. But Veronica was just getting warmed up. That evening, she organized an emergency HOA meeting. And let me tell you, this woman could sell ice to Eskimos. She stood up there with charts and graphs claiming my boat was leaking fuel and endangering the local wildlife. Mr. Stone's vessel, she announced with the drama of a prosecutor, poses an imminent threat to our lake's delicate ecosystem. The musty smell of the community center mixed with nervous sweat as neighbors shifted uncomfortably. Veronica had printed professional-looking pamphlets. Preserve our lake's natural beauty, complete with stock photos of oil-covered ducks that definitely weren't from Crystal Lake. 18 out of 24 homeowners signed her petition, not because they believed her environmental nonsense, mind you, but because Veronica had spent weeks whispering about property values dropping if the boat situation wasn't resolved. Fear is a hell of a motivator. By Thursday, the local newspaper ran a story, Lake Community Battles Eyesore Boat. The reporter clearly got all her information from Veronica's press release. No one bothered to call me for comment, of course. While Veronica was busy playing politics, I was doing something more productive research. Friday morning found me at the county courthouse digging through HOA formation documents like a bloodhound on a scent trail. The elderly clerk, Emma Kowalski, recognized my last name immediately. Stone? Your grandfather filed something important here back in 1962. Might still be in the archive basement. 3 hours later, covered in dust and sneezing from old paper smell, I struck gold. Original property survey, deed transfers, and something that made my heart race. Property lines that extended 200 feet further into the lake than I'd ever realized. Granddad had been smarter than I gave him credit for, but while I'm discovering I own more land than I thought, Veronica's team was getting creative with intimidation tactics. I came home to find orange safety cones surrounding my entire dock. Bright yellow signs appeared overnight. Hazardous watercraft. Proceed with caution. The plastic flutter of those signs in the evening breeze sounded like mocking laughter. Then Richard Hartwell made his move. Called my insurance company directly. My agent, Jim Patterson guy I'd known for 15 years, sounded embarrassed when he called. Garrett, I'm getting complaints about your property being a community hazard. Corporate's asking questions about liability coverage. What kind of complaints? Safety violations, environmental risks, neighbor disputes. Look, I don't believe it, but if this escalates, they might cancel your policy. That's when I realized this wasn't just about moving my boat. They were trying to make my life so miserable I'd sell and leave. Classic HOA playbook death by 1,000 paper cuts. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They assumed I was just some stubborn old guy clinging to his boat. During my marine consulting days, I'd learned something valuable from a water rights dispute in Colorado. Government transparency laws are your friend if you know how to use them. So I filed a Freedom of Information Act request for all HOA correspondence with county officials. Cost me nothing, gave me everything. The emails were beautiful. Veronica had promised the county planning committee that the boat problem would be resolved quickly as part of their community development approval. She'd essentially guaranteed my removal before even talking to me. Sunday evening, I'm sitting on my dock watching the sunset when young Tommy Anderson from next door rides up on his bike. Mr. Stone, my mom says I shouldn't talk to you, but I think your boat is cool. Thanks, Tommy. Your mom's just scared. Scared of what? Out of the mouths of babes, right? What were they scared of? A widower who just wanted to fish in peace? That night, I found my dock lines had been loosened. Not cut too obvious, just loosened enough that Sarah's dream drifted into shallow water by morning. The scrape of fiberglass against rocks made me want to find Veronica and have a very different kind of conversation. But patience, Garrett. Patience. Because I'd found something in those archives that was about to turn this whole game upside down. Something that would make Veronica's environmental concerns seem like the least of her problems. Monday morning brought new horrors. I woke to find Sarah's dream listing slightly to starboard. Someone had cut my dock lines during the night and she'd drifted into the shallows. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the acrid smell of diesel fuel mixing with lake water. They'd punctured my fuel tank. Not enough to sink her, just enough to create a small slick that would photograph beautifully for their environmental damage narrative. The oily rainbow on the water's surface caught the morning light like evidence of my guilt. By 9 a.m., I had an EPA inspector at my dock. Anonymous complaint about illegal fuel discharge. The inspector, a tired-looking guy named Dave, seemed more annoyed than concerned. "Mr. Stone, I've got to investigate every complaint, but between you and me, this looks like sabotage, not negligence. Can you put that in your report?" "I can note the fuel line was cut with a sharp instrument. Beyond that," he shrugged apologetically. While Dave documented the scene, Veronica was holding court at the community center. I could hear her voice carrying across the water as she led another emergency meeting about establishing safety barriers around the public boat launch. Public boat launch, on my property. The sharp crack of hammers echoed across the lake as contractors installed posts for what Veronica called protective barriers. Pretty name for a fence designed to block my access to my own shoreline. That afternoon brought another legal surprise, a certified letter demanding I appear at a Lake Restoration Committee hearing. Apparently, they'd formed an official-sounding group to study water quality issues, the kind of bureaucratic theater that makes regular folks throw up their hands and give up. But I'd learned something during my years dealing with government contracts. Paper trails work both ways. Back in my consulting days, I'd helped a client fight a similar property dispute in Oregon. The developer claimed water rights they'd never actually purchased. We beat them by tracing the original surveys back to territorial land grants. History is a powerful weapon when you know how to wield it. So I spent Tuesday diving deeper into those 1962 archives Emma had shown me. What I found made my coffee go cold. The original lake wasn't natural. Crystal Lake was created in 1954 by a dam project, and my grandfather had owned the land before it was flooded. The government had paid him $12,000 for temporary flooding rights, but the mineral and water rights? Those stayed with the family, in perpetuity. Wednesday brought escalation on multiple fronts. My mailbox overflowed with certified letters. Noise ordinance violations. My boat engine disturbed the peace. Allegations of unauthorized dock modifications, and my personal favorite, a property tax assessor wanting to conduct a routine inspection. Routine my ass. They were fishing for any code violation they could find. The social warfare was getting ugly too. Veronica's book club had apparently designated me as their favorite topic of conversation. I learned this from Betty, Margaret's mother, who cornered me at the grocery store. "That Hartwell woman says you threatened to fence off the entire lake," Betty whispered, glancing around nervously. "Says you're having some kind of breakdown since your wife died." The bitter taste of rage filled my mouth. Using Sarah's death as ammunition? That crossed a line I didn't even know existed. Thursday evening, I'm grilling a simple dinner when two police officers knock on my door. Wellness check. Someone had called in concerns about my mental state and possible threats against neighbors. Officer Martinez, no relation to Buck, was apologetic but thorough. "Sir, we have to check these things out. Someone reported you've been acting erratically, making statements about cutting off community access to the lake." "Officer, the only erratic behavior around here is someone sabotaging my boat and filing false reports. We understand your frustration, but we need to document that you're not a danger to yourself or others." After they left, I sat on my dock watching the sunset, feeling more isolated than I had since Sarah's funeral. Veronica was systematically destroying my reputation, my peace of mind, and my connection to the only community I'd ever called home. That's when I noticed something interesting. She'd made a critical error in her campaign of harassment. Every single legal document, every complaint, every official committee had one thing in common. They all assumed the HOA had authority over the lake. Not once had anyone checked who actually owned the water. Old habits from my engineering days kicked in. When you're designing a system, you always verify your assumptions, especially the fundamental ones. Friday morning found me at the State Historical Society requesting every document related to the 1954 Crystal Lake Dam project. The librarian, a sharp-eyed woman named Ruth, disappeared into the archives and returned with a banker's box that hadn't been opened in decades. Inside was everything: original contracts, compensation agreements, environmental impact studies from the Eisenhower era. And buried in the middle, like a legal landmine waiting to explode, was a document that would change everything. A document that proved Veronica's entire campaign was built on quicksand. Saturday morning, 6 a.m. I'm enjoying the crisp bite of autumn air with my coffee when I hear the rumble of heavy trucks. Through my kitchen window, I watch a convoy of vehicles park at the community center. Morrison & Associates lawyers, environmental consultants, even a TV news van. Veronica had gone nuclear. By noon, I had a process server at my door with a lawsuit thick as a dictionary. Public nuisance and environmental hazard, seeking $50,000 in damages for community reputation harm, and an immediate injunction to remove my boat. The legal language was designed to intimidate, but after 30 years in engineering, I'd read my share of hostile contracts. What caught my attention wasn't what they were claiming, it was what they weren't claiming. No mention of water rights, no assertion of lake ownership. They were suing me for being a nuisance on my own property without ever establishing they had standing to complain. That afternoon, Channel 7 News ran a segment. Lake community versus stubborn boat owner. Veronica positioned herself as the environmental crusader, standing at the water's edge with concerned parent props 3 neighbor kids holding handmade signs about clean water. "We're not anti-boat," she told the reporter, her voice dripping with reasonableness. "We're pro-environment, pro-safety, pro-community. Mr. Stone's refusal to cooperate forces us to take legal action." The reporter ate it up. No one called me for comment naturally. Monday brought the settlement offer. Richard Hartwell himself delivered it, looking like a man who closed deals by crushing spirits. "Garrett, let's be reasonable here." He stood in my living room, surveying my modest furniture with barely concealed disdain. "Move the boat, pay our legal fees, call it $10,000, and this all goes away." "And if I refuse?" His smile could have frozen salt water. "Legal battles are expensive, stressful. At your age, with your health." He let the threat hang in the air like smoke. "My health is fine, Richard. For now." But prolonged litigation, community hostility, financial pressure, these things have a way of wearing a man down. After he left, I sat on my dock thinking about everything I'd lost in recent years. Sarah, my business, most of my old friends. Was this boat really worth fighting for? Then I remembered something Sarah used to say. The moment you stop standing up for what's right is the moment you stop being who you are. Tuesday brought the Dirty Tricks campaign into full swing. My internet service mysteriously went down. UPS couldn't find my address for deliveries. The local hardware store clerk apologized awkwardly when he told me they were out of stock on items I could see sitting on the shelves. Veronica was using her social network like a weapon, pressuring every local business that wanted to maintain good relationships with the HOA's wealthy members. But she'd underestimated something important. Not everyone in town was part of her fan club. Buck Martinez called Wednesday evening, his voice tight with anger. "Garrett, they're trying to pressure me to ban your boat from the marina. Richard Hartwell threatened to tank my Yelp reviews if I keep servicing you." "What did you tell him?" "I told him where he could stick his reviews. But brother, they're playing for keeps. Margaret says the HOA burned through $15,000 in legal fees already, and they're talking about special assessments to fund more." That night, I made a decision that would either end this war or escalate it beyond all recognition. Back in the 1990s, I'd helped design a water treatment facility in Montana. The project taught me something crucial. Water rights law is older and stronger than almost any other property law. When you own water rights, you don't just own the liquid, you own the ecosystem. Thursday morning found me at the county surveyor's office with Ruth from the Historical Society. We spent 4 hours cross-referencing the 1954 dam contracts with current property boundaries. What we discovered was stunning in its simplicity. The government had purchased surface flooding rights from my grandfather, not ownership. They'd paid him to let them flood his land temporarily for the dam project. But the water itself, the lake bed, the fish, the navigation rights, all of that remained with the Stone family, forever. The legal implications were staggering. Every boat dock in Willowbrook Estates was built on my property without permission. Every time they organized community swim parties or fishing tournaments, they were trespassing. The HOA had been collecting dues for lake maintenance of a water body they had no legal right to touch. Friday afternoon, I received the most beautiful piece of mail I'd ever seen. Confirmation from the State Water Resources Department that the Stone family retained all water rights to Crystal Lake in perpetuity, as granted in the original 1954 compensation agreement. That evening, as I watched the sunset paint the water gold, I couldn't help but smile. Veronica thought she was fighting a stubborn old man with a boat. She was actually fighting the legal owner of the entire lake. Saturday morning, I drove to the state capitol with Ruth from the Historical Society riding shotgun. She'd spent Friday night on the phone with her contacts at the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and what she'd discovered made my hands shake as I gripped the steering wheel. "Garrett, you need to see the original contracts," she said, clutching a manila folder like it contained nuclear secrets. "Not the summaries everyone's been working from the actual 1954 documents." The Federal Records Archive building smelled like old leather and bureaucracy. Ruth led me through corridors lined with filing cabinets that stretched to the ceiling, past clerks who moved with the unhurried pace of people who knew every document would outlive them. In basement vault B47, we found what we were looking for. The Crystal Lake Dam project file was 3 inches thick, bound in government green and stamped with approvals from departments that no longer existed. I opened it expecting property transfer documents. What I found instead changed everything. Payment authorization, Harold Stone, compensation for temporary agricultural land flooding, $12,000. Temporary, not permanent. Temporary. My grandfather hadn't sold the land to the government. He'd rented it. "Look at Section 4B, Ruth whispered, pointing to a paragraph that would haunt Veronica's dreams. Grantor retains all mineral rights, water navigation rights, and recreational usage rights in perpetuity. Upon completion of dam project, all rights revert to original landowner family with full legal standing. The dam was completed in 1956. For 68 years, my family had owned not just the water, but the lake bed, the fishing rights, the navigation authority, and every single thing that touched the water, including 24 very expensive boat docks. The musty smell of old paper seemed sweeter as I photographed every page. The government had created Crystal Lake on my grandfather's land, paid him rent for the privilege, and somehow everyone had forgotten the landlord still existed. But it got better. Ruth flipped to the environmental impact section, her finger tracing lines of 1950s bureaucratic language. "The temporary flooding area shall remain under original landowner jurisdiction for all recreational and environmental management purposes. Federal oversight limited to dam maintenance access only." What does that mean in plain English? It means you're not just the owner, Garrett. You're the environmental authority. Every time Veronica filed an EPA complaint about your boat, she was complaining to the wrong jurisdiction. You are the jurisdiction. My phone buzzed with a text from Buck Martinez. "Emergency HOA meeting tonight. Veronica says she has final solution to boat problem. Thought you should know." I laughed out loud in that government basement, startling a clerk who'd probably never heard joy echo off those walls. Veronica was planning her final offensive against a man who legally owned the battlefield. The drive home felt like floating. Every tree, every bend in the road, every glimpse of Crystal Lake through the autumn leaves looked different now. This wasn't just my grandfather's property anymore. It was my kingdom, complete with subjects who'd been paying HOA dues to maintain someone else's lake. Ruth called her contact at the state environmental office from my kitchen table. After 20 minutes of technical discussion, she hung up with a grin that belonged in a shark documentary. "The state has no record of water rights transfer for Crystal Lake. As far as they're concerned, it's a private recreational waterway under your environmental management. Every complaint Veronica filed is going to be forwarded to you for resolution." "You mean?" "I mean you're about to become the busiest environmental compliance officer in the county. Population, One very angry HOA president who just discovered she's been barking up the wrong tree for 6 months. That evening, I sat on my dock watching the sun set over my lake, listening to the sounds of Veronica's emergency meeting drifting across the water. Let her plan her final solution. I had mine ready too. Monday morning, I called Rebecca, a water rights attorney I'd found through my old marine consulting network. Her office overlooked the Columbia River, and when I explained my situation, her laugh carried the sharp edge of someone who'd seen David beat Goliath before. "Mr. Stone, I've been practicing water law for 20 years, and I've never seen a case this clear-cut. Your grandfather was smarter than most lawyers." Rebecca brought in Marcus Thompson, an environmental attorney who specialized in lake management. Together, we mapped out a 3-phase strategy that would make Sun Tzu proud. Phase 1. Establish my legal authority without revealing the full scope of my rights. Let Veronica keep digging her hole deeper. Phase 2. Document every single violation of my property rights, building an airtight harassment case. Phase 3. Offer the community a reasonable settlement that protected my rights while preserving neighborhood harmony. The scratch of pencils on legal pads filled Rebecca's conference room as we calculated damages. That unauthorized community dock they'd built, $85,000 construction cost, all on my property. The harassment campaign, quantifiable in medical bills, insurance complications, and reputation damage. But the real revelation came when Marcus pulled up environmental regulations. "Garrett, as the water rights holder, you're responsible for environmental compliance. Every boat that uses this lake needs your permission. Every swimming event, every fishing tournament, all of it requires the landowner's approval." Including HOA activities? Especially HOA activities. They've been operating without permits on private property for 4 years. Tuesday found me at Buck Martinez's marina, recruiting my first ally. Buck had 30 years of lake experience and zero patience for entitled rich folks telling him how to run his business. "What do you need, brother?" "Documentation. Every time they've pressured you, threatened you, tried to control lake access. I need witnesses to their pattern of harassment." Buck's weathered face split into a grin that would make pirates nervous. "Son, I've been keeping records since day one. These people tried to shut down my family's business because we don't fit their country club image." His files were beautiful. Recorded phone calls, threatening letters, documented attempts to pressure the county into revoking his permits. 4 years of evidence that Veronica's crew had been systematically targeting anyone who didn't bow to their authority. Wednesday brought an unexpected ally. Margaret, the HOA treasurer, knocked on my door at sunset, her hands shaking as she held a manila folder. "Mr. Stone, I can't sleep anymore. What we're doing to you, it's wrong." Margaret had been quietly documenting financial irregularities, HOA dues being spent on legal fees for Veronica's personal vendetta, community money funding private harassment campaigns, board meetings where members were threatened into compliance. "She spent $47,000 of community money on that lawsuit against you, money that was supposed to go to road maintenance and snow removal." The weight of betrayal in Margaret's voice told me everything. Veronica hadn't just declared war on me, she'd betrayed her own neighbor's trust. Thursday's research session at the county environmental office yielded pure gold. I'd learned from my consulting days that bureaucrats keep everything, and Crystal Lake's file went back to the original environmental impact assessments. The 1954 study was a masterpiece of government thoroughness. Water quality, fish populations, wildlife habitat, vegetation mapping, everything documented in mind-numbing detail. Most importantly, it established baseline environmental conditions that my lake currently exceeded. Crystal Lake wasn't just clean, it was pristine. Cleaner than when the government first flooded it. Friday brought the technical education phase. Marcus walked me through the legal framework that would govern my environmental authority: Federal Clean Water Act, state recreational waterway regulations, private property environmental management standards, a complex web of laws that all pointed to one simple truth. I wasn't just the owner, I was the environmental steward, the navigation authority, and the recreational access controller. Every function Veronica claimed for the HOA legally belonged to me. That evening, I spread county survey maps across my kitchen table, marking every dock, every access point, every structure touching my water. The crisp sound of pencil on paper accompanied my growing amazement at the scope of unauthorized development. 24 boat docks, a community swimming area, 3 fishing piers, 2 kayak launches, all built without permission from the actual property owner. But revenge wasn't my goal. Resolution was. Sarah had always said the best victories were the ones where everybody won something. So I designed a community access agreement that would protect my rights while preserving everyone's lake enjoyment. Reasonable annual fees based on property value, environmental protection standards everyone could live with, a governance structure that respected both private property rights and community interests. Saturday night, I called my adult kids to explain what I'd discovered. My daughter Sarah Jr. was a paralegal in Seattle. My son Mike worked construction in Portland. Both had inherited their mother's sense of justice and their grandfather's patience. "Dad," Sarah Jr. said, "you could kick them all off the lake permanently if you wanted." I could, but that's not who your mother raised me to be. As I prepared for what Buck called the nuclear option, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The quiet confidence that comes from holding all the cards and choosing to play them with honor. Sunday morning brought a new low. I woke to find polluter spray-painted across my garage door in bright red letters. But that wasn't the worst of it. Someone had dumped motor oil along my shoreline overnight, creating an environmental disaster that would photograph beautifully for the evening news. The acrid smell of petroleum mixed with morning mist as I documented the sabotage with my phone. These people had literally polluted the lake to frame me for pollution. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so destructive. By 9 a.m., Veronica was holding an impromptu press conference at the community dock, my dock, legally speaking. Channel 7 was back, along with a reporter from the environmental blog Green Valley Voice. She stood there in a white pantsuit like some kind of ecological Joan of Arc, pointing at the oil slick her people had created. "This is what we've been warning about," she declared, her voice carrying perfectly across the water. "Mr. Stone's reckless boat maintenance is destroying our pristine lake ecosystem." The reporter nodded sympathetically, scribbling notes about environmental terrorism and one man's war against nature. Nobody bothered to mention that the oil was still wet from last night's sabotage, or that it formed a perfect line along my property, exactly where someone would dump it for maximum visual impact. That afternoon brought federal escalation. EPA investigators arrived with official badges and grim expressions, responding to what they described as multiple complaints about ongoing environmental violations. Agent Sarah Willis was thorough and professional, but I could see the skepticism in her eyes as she examined the obviously planted evidence. When I showed her the security footage of 3 figures in dark clothing dumping oil at 2 a.m., her expression hardened. "Mr. Stone, this appears to be an intentional contamination event. Have you had conflicts with neighbors recently?" You could say that. By Tuesday, Veronica had filed a federal lawsuit claiming my water rights threatened interstate commerce. The legal theory was ridiculous. Crystal Lake didn't connect to any navigable waterways, but it bought her time in headlines. "Local man claims to own public lake," read the newspaper story, complete with a photo of me looking stubborn and unreasonable next to Veronica's concerned citizen pose. The harassment was becoming systematic now. Richard Hartwell's real estate company had somehow convinced my bank to flag my accounts for suspicious activity. My credit cards were being declined at local businesses. The post office claimed they couldn't deliver mail to my address due to safety concerns. Wednesday brought the nuclear option. Veronica announced plans to have Crystal Lake declared a protected wetland under federal environmental law. It was a brilliant move, used my love for the lake against me by making it illegal to use. The cold weight of bureaucratic dread settled in my stomach as I read the paperwork. Once the feds designated something a protected area, private property rights became secondary to environmental protection. I could own the water and still be forbidden to use it. But Veronica had made a crucial mistake in her rush to destroy me. She'd filed the environmental protection petition using false information about lake ownership. Federal forms require accurate property records, and she'd claimed the HOA held water rights they'd never possessed. Thursday evening, my phone rang with the call I'd been waiting for. Rebecca's voice carried the satisfaction of a lawyer who'd found the perfect trap. "Garrett, Veronica just committed perjury on federal documents. She swore under oath that the HOA owns water rights to Crystal Lake. We have her. What's our next move? We spring the trap. Let her dig deeper while we prepare the evidence that'll bury her whole operation." Friday brought the community fracture I'd been dreading. A hand-delivered note from the Anderson family. Tommy's parents arrived with their apology for signing Veronica's petition. "We were afraid," Carol Anderson wrote in shaky handwriting. Afraid of the social pressure, afraid of what refusing might cost us. But watching what they're doing to you, it's not who we want to be. The rustling of paper seemed loud in my quiet kitchen as I read similar letters from 2 other families. Veronica's reign of terror was cracking her own coalition. That weekend, I made my final preparations. Security cameras captured every visitor, every conversation, every act of sabotage. Financial records documented every illegal expenditure of HOA funds. Environmental reports proved the lake's pristine condition despite Veronica's pollution claims. Most importantly, I had something Veronica couldn't fight. The truth, backed by 70 years of government documentation. Sunday evening, I sat on my dock watching the sunset paint my lake golden red. Tomorrow would bring the confrontation we'd all been building toward. Veronica thought she was fighting a stubborn old man with a boat problem. She was about to discover she'd been committing federal crimes against the legal owner of everything she claimed to protect. The gentle lapping of waves against my dock sounded like applause for the performance about to begin. Monday morning brought Veronica's final gambit, a restraining order claiming I'd threatened community safety. The sheriff's deputy who served the papers looked embarrassed as he handed me documents alleging I'd menacingly operated my vessel in proximity to children and made verbal threats against neighborhood security. Complete fiction, but effective theater. The temporary restraining order banned me from operating my boat until a hearing could be scheduled. Veronica had essentially grounded me on my own lake, using the legal system like a weapon against someone she'd never bothered to understand. "I'm sorry about this, Mr. Stone," Deputy Martinez said, glancing at the lake, "but I have to serve what the judge signs." "Just doing your job, officer. I understand." What I understood was that Veronica had just committed perjury on legal documents. Again. Tuesday's escalation was breathtaking in its scope. Richard Hartwell's commercial banking connections had convinced 3 local institutions to freeze my assets pending investigation of potential environmental liability claims. My insurance company received anonymous tips about unsafe property conditions. The county building inspector arrived with a clipboard and a mission to find violations. I watched it all unfold with the calm detachment of someone who knew the ending before the movie started. The building inspector, a thorough man named Jerry Kowalski, Emma's son, as it turned out, spent 4 hours examining my property with the dedication of someone looking for needles in haystacks. "Mr. Stone, I've got to investigate every complaint, but your place is solid. Whoever filed these reports either hasn't been here or they're lying through their teeth." "What kind of complaints?" "Illegal dock modifications, unpermitted structures, environmental hazards. Your dock meets every code we have, and I helped write half of them." Wednesday brought media manipulation on an industrial scale. Veronica had hired a public relations firm to coordinate her environmental protection narrative. Professional photographers captured concerned citizens standing near the oil stain her people had created. Social media influencers posted about corporate polluters destroying public resources. The sharp click of camera shutters followed me everywhere I went in town. I was becoming the villain in a story I hadn't written, starring in a drama based on lies so bold they took my breath away. Thursday evening, the harassment turned personal in ways that crossed every line of human decency. Someone had broken into my house while I was at the courthouse and scattered photographs of Sarah throughout my living room, pictures from her cancer treatment, pictures from her funeral, pictures of her memorial service. The message was clear. Even my grief wasn't safe from their campaign. I sat in my violated living room, surrounded by images of the woman I'd loved for 28 years, and felt something crystallize inside me. This wasn't about property rights anymore. This was about dignity, respect, and the basic human decency that separates civilization from chaos. But Veronica had made one fatal error in her escalation. By breaking into my house, she'd committed a felony that even her lawyers couldn't spin as civil litigation. Friday brought the final pieces falling into place. Margaret arrived at my door with banker's boxes full of HOA financial records, her face pale with the weight of betrayal she'd discovered. "Garrett, it's worse than I thought. They've been using community funds to hire private investigators, pay for social media campaigns, even bribe local contractors to refuse you service. We're talking about $60,000 in illegal expenditures." The rustling of documents filled my kitchen as we spread evidence across every surface. Financial fraud, perjury, harassment, criminal trespass, environmental destruction. Veronica's campaign had become a crime spree documented in exquisite detail. That afternoon, my security cameras captured something beautiful. Veronica and Richard planting more evidence along my shoreline. They were so focused on creating their environmental disaster narrative that they never noticed the high-definition footage documenting their crimes. Saturday morning, I received a call that changed everything. Agent Willis from the EPA had completed her investigation of the oil spill and reached conclusions that would make Veronica's environmental protection claims look like performance art. Mr. Stone, the contamination was clearly intentional. Samples show motor oil from at least 3 different sources, dumped in quantities designed for visual impact rather than accidental spillage. We're recommending criminal charges for environmental vandalism. Against whom? We're still investigating, but whoever did this faces federal environmental crimes charges. Ironic, considering the complaints about your boat's environmental impact. Sunday evening, I sat on my dock for what I knew would be the last quiet moment before the storm. Tomorrow's town hall meeting would end this war one way or another. Veronica thought she was fighting a stubborn old man who refused to follow community rules. She was about to discover she'd spent 6 months committing federal crimes against the legal owner of the entire lake she claimed to protect. The gentle sound of my lake lapping against my dock sounded like justice preparing to be served. Monday evening, 7 p.m. The Willowbrook Community Center buzzed with the energy of a small-town sporting event, except tonight's game was legal warfare with an audience of 200-plus residents, 3 news crews, and enough government officials to fill a phone book. I arrived early, carrying a simple manila folder that contained enough legal dynamite to level Veronica's entire operation. The sharp scent of coffee and nervous sweat filled the air as neighbors who hadn't spoken to me in months avoided eye contact while finding their seats. Veronica entered like a conquering general, flanked by her legal team and trailed by reporters documenting her brave environmental stand. She dressed for victory. Crisp white suit, environmental organization pins on her lapel, the kind of confident smile that comes from believing your own propaganda. County Commissioner Janet Walsh called the meeting to order. We're here to address ongoing disputes regarding Crystal Lake access and environmental protection. Mrs. Hartwell, you requested this forum. Veronica approached the podium with polished PowerPoint slides and practiced talking points. For 20 minutes, she painted me as an environmental terrorist destroying a precious community resource. Children held signs about clean water. Concerned parents testified about safety fears. Professional photographs showed the oil contamination her people had created. Property values are declining, she declared, pointing to charts that would make a campaign manager proud. Families are considering moving. One person's selfish refusal to follow reasonable guidelines threatens our entire community investment. The crowd murmured approval. Local TV cameras captured concerned nods and worried expressions. Veronica was winning the narrative war with the skill of someone who'd practiced this performance for months. Commissioner Walsh nodded toward me. Mr. Stone, you have 30 minutes to respond. I stood slowly, my manila folder feeling heavier than it should. The creak of old floorboards under my feet echoed through the suddenly silent room. Thank you, Commissioner. I'd like to start with a simple question. Who owns Crystal Lake? Veronica's lawyer started to object, but I continued. Mrs. Hartwell has spent months claiming environmental authority over this lake, filing complaints with state and federal agencies, demanding environmental studies, organizing protection committees. I opened my folder. But she's never established the fundamental legal requirement for any of this: ownership. The room stirred uneasily. This wasn't the defensive response they'd expected. I have here the original 1954 U.S. Army Corps of Engineers contract for the Crystal Lake Dam project. I held up the document, its government seal clearly visible. Harold Stone, my grandfather, was paid $12,000 for temporary agricultural land flooding. Temporary. The water rights, mineral rights, and navigation rights remained with the Stone family, in perpetuity. The sharp intake of breath from the audience sounded like air leaving a punctured balloon. Commissioner Walsh, I'd like to introduce Agent Sarah Willis from the Environmental Protection Agency. Agent Willis stood, her federal badge catching the overhead lights. Based on our investigation, Mr. Stone holds exclusive water rights to Crystal Lake under federal recognition. All environmental complaints regarding this waterway should have been directed to him as the legal environmental authority. Veronica's face went white. Her lawyer whispered urgently in her ear. I'd also like to introduce Rebecca, my water rights attorney, with documentation from the State Environmental Office. Rebecca approached the microphone with legal confidence. The state of Oregon recognizes Harold Stone's 1954 water rights agreement as valid and binding. Crystal Lake is classified as a private recreational waterway under Mr. Stone's environmental management. The room erupted in confused murmurs. Veronica shot to her feet, her composure cracking like ice in summer heat. "This is ridiculous. The HOA has maintained this lake for 4 years. We've invested thousands in environmental protection." "Mrs. Hartwell," I said quietly, "you've invested thousands in maintaining someone else's property without permission. Every dock in Willowbrook Estates was built on my land without authorization." Sheriff's Deputy Martinez stood from the back of the room. "Mr. Stone, we've completed our investigation of the break-in at your residence and the environmental vandalism incidents." The metallic click of handcuffs seemed impossibly loud in the silent room. "Veronica Hartwell, you're under arrest for criminal trespass, environmental vandalism, and filing false police reports." The TV cameras swung toward Veronica as her world collapsed in real time. Her carefully constructed environmental crusader image crumbled as deputies read her rights while neighbors watched in stunned silence. But I wasn't finished. "Commissioner Walsh, as the legal owner of Crystal Lake, I'm formally establishing the Crystal Lake Conservation Trust. $50,000 for environmental protection, education programs, and continued community access under proper legal framework." The room buzzed with confused hope. I'd just transformed from villain to benefactor in a single sentence. Mrs. Hartwell spent months claiming I wanted to destroy this community. The truth is, I want to protect it. But protection requires respect for law, honesty in dealing with neighbors, and understanding that rights come with responsibilities. As Veronica was led away in handcuffs, her environmental protection crusade exposed as a criminal harassment campaign, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Sarah's death: the deep satisfaction of justice served with mercy. 3 months later, Crystal Lake looked the same but felt completely different. The gentle morning mist rising from the water carried the scent of new beginnings instead of old conflicts, and the soft splash of kids jumping off docks had replaced the sharp voices of legal arguments. Veronica had pleaded guilty to environmental vandalism and criminal harassment, receiving 18 months probation and $25,000 in restitution. Richard faced federal fraud charges for his banking manipulation schemes. Their Willowbrook mansion went up for sale within weeks. Apparently, living next to the man you tried to destroy makes for awkward neighborhood barbecues. The community had dissolved the corrupt HOA and formed the Crystal Lake Neighborhood Association, a voluntary organization with transparent finances and actual respect for property rights. Margaret was elected president in a landslide, running on a platform of never again and sunshine laws for everything. The Crystal Lake Conservation Trust became the centerpiece of our transformation. That $50,000 I donated grew to $125,000 through community contributions and a federal environmental stewardship grant. We established scholarship programs for local kids studying environmental science, partnered with the State University for water quality research, and created educational programs that brought school children to learn about lake ecosystems. Sarah Jr. moved back from Seattle to help manage the trust, saying she wanted to honor her mother's memory by protecting the place that meant so much to our family. Watching her organize community cleanup days from the same dock where I'd fought legal battles felt like the best kind of healing. The legal precedent from our case spread across 3 states, with property rights organizations using my story to educate homeowners about deed research and water rights protection. I started volunteering at a legal aid clinic, helping other folks fight HOA overreach with knowledge instead of expensive lawyers. Buck Martinez's marina thrived with the legal certainty that came from proper property agreements. We'd formalized his operation with a long-term lease that protected his family business while contributing to lake maintenance. His grandson Tommy, now 12, spent weekends learning boat maintenance and environmental monitoring, connecting with the same water that had saved my sanity after Sarah's death. The annual Crystal Lake Environmental Festival drew 800 people this year. Local businesses sponsored booths about water conservation and sustainable recreation. Kids competed in canoe races while parents learned about riparian rights and environmental stewardship. The economic impact supported everyone from the hardware store to the coffee shop, proving that properly managed natural resources benefit entire communities. Most surprisingly, 3 former Willowbrook families apologized personally for their role in the harassment campaign. The Andersons became close friends, with Carol organizing lake cleanup volunteers and Tom helping with dock maintenance. Even some of Veronica's former supporters admitted they'd been caught up in fear and manipulation. My relationship with the lake had evolved too. Sarah's dream wasn't just my floating therapy session anymore. It was the flagship of our educational fleet, taking kids on science expeditions and teaching environmental monitoring techniques. The boat that Veronica tried to ban became a symbol of community cooperation and environmental protection. Dating again felt strange at 65, but I'd met Elena Vasquez at one of our environmental education workshops. She was a retired science teacher whose husband had died 2 years after Sarah, and we bonded over shared loss, lake conservation, and the discovery that healing doesn't require forgetting, just moving forward with purpose. Last week, I received a letter from a homeowner in Colorado facing similar HOA harassment over his solar panels. He'd found my story online and wanted advice about property rights research. I spent an hour on the phone teaching him about deed examination and legal resource investigation, passing along the knowledge that had saved my home and sanity. That's the real victory here, not just winning my battle, but helping others win theirs. Tonight, as I write this sitting on my dock with a cup of coffee and the soft sound of loons calling across the water, I'm thinking about Sarah and how proud she'd be of what we built from this conflict. We turned harassment into community, legal warfare into environmental protection, and isolation into connection. So here's my challenge to you. Drop a comment sharing your HOA nightmare story. You're not alone in fighting petty tyrants and neighborhood bullies. Knowledge is power, patience is strength, and sometimes the best revenge is building something beautiful from the ashes of their attacks. Hit subscribe and the bell icon. I've got more stories about regular people beating corrupt systems, and trust me, justice served with patience tastes sweeter than any quick revenge.